You owe the Mafia $1 million. A glass vibrates. Not enough to make noise. Just enough to move. A few millimeters across a wooden table in a dimly lit room. Nobody touches it. Nobody speaks. The movement comes from somewhere else. A heavy door opening. Slowly. Then footsteps. Measured. Unhurried. Certain. And in that moment, before a single word is spoken, before a threat is made, before a demand is repeated, your body understands something your mind is still trying to process. You owe the Mafia $1 million, and they have come to collect. Most people imagine this moment incorrectly. They picture shouting, violence, guns, dramatic confrontations from movies. That is not usually how power works. Real power rarely needs to announce itself. The most dangerous people in history often spoke softly, because they understood something fundamental about human psychology. Fear is most effective when it arrives quietly. The door closes. The room becomes smaller. And suddenly $1 million no longer feels like a number. It feels like a force, an invisible weight pressing against your chest. A debt, a promise, a countdown. And the terrifying reality is that the debt itself may be the least dangerous part of the situation. Because money has never been the true currency of organizations like the Mafia. Control is. And to understand why owing them $1 million is so frightening, we have to look beyond crime, beyond gangsters, beyond headlines. We have to examine one of the oldest forces in human civilization, the force of obligation. Thousands of years before organized crime existed, humans were already trapped by debt. Ancient kings borrowed grain. Farmers borrowed livestock. Merchants borrowed silver. Entire civilizations expanded through promises about the future. The historian and anthropologist David Graeber observed something fascinating. Money did not create debt. Debt came first, long before coins, long before banks, long before modern economies. Human beings were already keeping invisible accounts with one another. You helped me. I owe you. You protected me. I owe you. You fed my family. I owe you. Debt became one of the earliest social technologies ever invented. And like all powerful technologies, it evolved. What begins as cooperation can eventually become domination. That transformation changed history. Empires rose on debt. Wars were financed through debt. Nations collapsed under debt. Entire populations became trapped by obligations they could never realistically repay. The numbers changed. The mechanism remained the same. Because debt is not merely economic. It is psychological. The moment you owe something significant, your future partially belongs to someone else. Every decision becomes connected to that obligation. Every sunrise arrives with a reminder. Every moment of peace becomes temporary. Now imagine that obligation is not held by a bank, not protected by regulations, not governed by courts. Imagine it belongs to an organization whose authority exists outside the official structures of society. Suddenly the debt becomes something older, something more primal. For most of human history, law was not guaranteed. Protection was not guaranteed. Justice was not guaranteed. Power belonged to those capable of enforcing their own rules. The Mafia emerged from that reality. Most people think organized crime is fundamentally about violence. That is not entirely true. Violence is expensive. Violence attracts attention. Violence creates unpredictability. The real product has often been certainty, a strange kind of certainty. If someone owed money, consequences followed. If agreements were broken, consequences followed. If promises were ignored, consequences followed. Brutal, illegal, sometimes horrifying, but predictable. And predictability creates power. Because humans fear uncertainty more than almost any. Researchers studying stress have repeatedly discovered something unsettling. People often experience greater anxiety from anticipating pain than from experiencing pain itself. The unknown becomes larger than reality. $1 million debt to the Mafia is terrifying not because you know exactly what will happen. It is terrifying because you do not. Every knock on the door becomes meaningful. Every unfamiliar car becomes suspicious. Every phone call acquires a hidden dimension. The The world itself changes shape. Not physically, psychologically. You begin living inside a different reality. One governed by probabilities. One governed by consequences. One governed by fear. And fear does something remarkable to human perception. It narrows the future. Normally, a person thinks in years. Plans, dreams, possibilities. Fear compresses everything. The future shrinks from years to weeks, from weeks to days, from days to hours. Eventually, survival becomes the only meaningful objective. This is why powerful organizations throughout history have rarely needed constant force. The human mind performs much of the work on its own. The imagination becomes an accomplice. The uncertainty becomes a prison. And yet there is something even more disturbing. Because the Mafia is not merely a criminal organization. It is an idea, an ancient idea, a recurring pattern that appears throughout history under different names. Feudal lords, warlords, cartels, protection rackets, corrupt governments, different structures. The same principle. When official systems fail, alternative systems emerge. Humans dislicatos. Even dangerous order often feels preferable to uncertainty. That realization reveals something uncomfortable about civilization itself. We like to believe society is built upon laws, but laws are ultimately stories backed by enforcement. The difference between legitimate authority and illegitimate authority is often far more fragile than people imagine. History is filled with examples where that line became blurred. Entire populations have lived under unofficial powers, unofficial economies, unofficial rulers. The Mafia did not invent this phenomenon. It inherited it, refined it, adapted it, which means your million-dollar debt is connected to something much larger than organized crime. It is connected to a question humanity has never fully answered. Who truly holds power? The person who writes the rules? Or the person who can enforce them? That question becomes increasingly uncomfortable the longer one thinks about it. Because beneath modern civilization lies a reality we rarely acknowledge. Order is not automatic. It must be maintained. Every peaceful street, every contract, every institution, every promise exists because enough people believe consequences will follow if those systems are challenged. Civilization itself depends on collective trust, and trust is surprisingly fragile. This is why stories about organized crime continue to fascinate people. Not because of violence, not because of money, because they expose hidden machinery. They reveal what society looks like when power operates without its usual disguise. And that brings us back to the room, back to the glass on the table, back to the footsteps. You still owe $1 million. The amount itself is almost irrelevant now, because something larger has been revealed. The debt was never just financial. It was existential, a reminder that every human life is entangled in obligations. Some visible, some invisible, some chosen, some inherited. Every society is built from promises. Every relationship contains debts that cannot be measured. Every future depends upon agreements we rarely think about. The Mafia simply makes that reality impossible to ignore. Most people spend their lives believing freedom means having choices. But perhaps freedom is something stranger. Perhaps freedom is the absence of obligations powerful enough to control your future. And almost nobody possesses that completely. The footsteps stop. The room becomes silent. $1 million. A single number. Yet hidden inside it are thousands of years of history, psychology, power, fear, civilization, and human nature. Because the most unsettling truth is not that someone can owe the Mafia $1 million. The most unsettling truth is that human beings have always lived inside systems of debt. To families, to societies, to governments, to history, to one another. The names change, the structures evolve, the uniforms look different, but the obligation remains. And somewhere, far beneath the noise of modern life, an ancient question still echoes through every civilization that has ever existed. What do you owe? And who ultimately comes to collect?